Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Donovan. I'm CEO of Music Victoria in Melbourne, Victoria, and I'm also a director of the Australian Music Industry Network. And we are absolutely thrilled today, AMIN and Music Victoria, to be partnering with the Office for the Arts on this Live Music Australia grant information panel. I'd like to commence by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, wherever we're meeting on. I'm meeting on the land of the great Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay respects to their elders past, present and future. We're very glad that we have so many of you joining us on this panel, because we were lucky in Victoria to have some live music venues grants available over the last 3 weeks, and we held a panel with our esteemed speakers here, Andrew Watt and Selene Bateman, and we received some great feedback that it really helped a number of venue owners successfully apply for their grants. So I'd like to introduce the panel today, but just before that, I'd just like to say how the timing couldn't be better, these venues grants being available. The Office for the Arts did a lot of consultation with industry. They came down to Melbourne, they met with a lot of Melbourne venues, they met with Sean Adams, who ran a live music venues program, Good Music Neighbours, and they were ready to launch the program in March, just as Corona struck. And we're really glad that they were so flexible, and they did some more consultation, and certainly for this year, with the 2 rounds of grants available, have very much been aimed at venues suffering through COVID at the moment, and some opportunities to help you restart. So that's the background to the funding grants, and I'll introduce the panel and hand it over to the Director and Assistant Director of Office for the Arts with the Federal Government. So I'd like to introduce Kim Brunoro, Director, Contemporary Music Team, Office for the Arts. Welcome, Kim. Assistant Director of Contemporary Music Team, Office for the Arts is Anni. Welcome, Anni. And we have Andrew Watt from Raven's Nest Consulting. Andrew's a journalist, lawyer, educator, and grant writer. And finally, we have Selene Bateman, Client Manager from Auspicious Arts Projects. Welcome, Selene. We also have Ash Bartlett, Music Victoria Professional Development Manager here, assisting with the logistics and answering some of your questions. So without further ado, I'd love to hand over to Kim and Anni, who are going to give a rundown of the grant guidelines. And then after that, Selene and Andrew will be giving you some tips on applying for these grants. You can ask questions in the chat room. So if you have a specific question, write the question in and say, ask everyone, and then we'll answer them when we can at the appropriate time. But we'll also dedicate the last 20 minutes to answer the questions that we haven't had a chance to address. So without further ado, I'll pass on over to Kim and Anni. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And first of all, I'd like to say hello to everyone and also acknowledge the country that we're all meeting on today. I'm here in Ngunnawal country in Canberra. So as Patrick said, I'm the Director of the Literature and Contemporary Music Team in Office for the Arts, and we have been talking to music stakeholders for over a year now about the announcement that the government made last year about the Australian Music Industry Package. Now I'm just going to start sharing my screen so we can go through the presentation. Apologies, as I'm just still, even though it's at this time you'd think I'd be better at it, I am only still getting used to Zoom. Okay, so as I started to say, so the last year, in part of the 1920 budget, the Australian government announced a $30.9 million package. It includes 5 elements of support for the music industry. Those elements, the main one we're here talking about today, the Live Music Australia package. Just quickly, the other elements include a Women in Music mentorship program, Indigenous contemporary music program, support for Sounds Australia for music exports, support and the Contemporary Music Touring Program, which is part of the Australia Council, so essentially a boost to that. Those 4 elements run over 4 to 5 years. The other 4 elements started last financial year. This new program, as we are here to talk about, just opened a few weeks ago, so it's running from 4 years from this financial year. As we've said, it's not COVID specific, but we have spent some time over the last few months talking to people and making some adaptations for the first year of funding. And we're also happy to work with venues and applicants as we go, making sure we can be flexible and adaptive as restrictions ease in different jurisdictions. So I guess we might touch on that later as we go through, but there's various elements of the things of the program that have been set up really for the small to medium venues in the longer term about sustainability in this sector. Just really briefly as well, the government has a whole range of other support. There's been some COVID specific aspects and other ongoing programs. The two COVID specific ones that are most relevant to the music industry are $10 million of crisis relief support that has gone to Support Act recently. And also just on the 11th of August, the government also announced the RISE fund, which is part of the government's economic support package, which is $250 million. That package includes a number of different elements, but the Restart and Investment to Sustain and Expand Fund, or RISE, again, is probably the most relevant to the music industry. We've already had quite a few inquiries from people with seeking clarification between Live Music Australia and RISE, but they're quite distinct. And RISE really has been set up as more COVID relief to get live events across the arts forms, so it's not music specific. And it's really to restart as we can. I guess larger sort of investment, it's sort of set up to support more capital sort of investment than the live music program. That program actually hasn't opened yet for applications. It opens on the 31st of August. And on the screen, you'll see I just mentioned a few other things which we have some crossover with. So Festivals Australia, the Regional Arts Fund, Contemporary Music Touring Program, as I've said, Playing Australia, and other state and government and industry programs. I'm not going to spend any more time on them, but it is important to remember that all of these existing sort of mechanisms are there, and we're trying not to overlap. So each of our programs will have a bit of a focus, and some of these other programs may be more relevant for particular activities. And of course, we're happy in the team here. We'll give some contact details at the end to sort of discuss projects that are sort of relevant to Live Music Australia versus some of the other programs. I think that's probably enough of an overview, and I'm just going to hand it over to Annie to actually get into the Live Music Australia program. Annie's going to give me a wave when she wants me to change slides, because I'm...
Thanks, Kim.
Okay, hello. I'd also like to acknowledge we met to an animal land. So just jumping right in then into some of the detail in relation to the Live Music Australia program. So the program runs over 4 years, and there will be 2 rounds each year. It's anticipated that most of the grants will be between 5,000 and 100,000, but they depend very much on the scope of the activity, like how complex it is, and also on value for money. So how much it's actually going to deliver will depend on how much money you are applying for. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about that later. But also we look at a broad range of activities across all of Australia. So we want applications from urban, regional and remote. You can apply for multiple rounds. So if you apply in one round, you can apply in the next round and the round after that. There's no problem with that. If you're unsuccessful in a round, you can apply the next round. So just be aware that you can do that. And potentially a successful applicant might apply in this round, say, to upgrade their PA. They could then apply in the following round to undertake some programming now that they've got their new PA. I think that's it for this slide. Kim, do you want to go to next? So the objectives, I guess just a little bit of background about the program and how it was developed. It really came from industry. So it was about industry approaching government and saying contemporary music is a really important industry in the Australian creative industries. And it's this particular part of the industry, the small to medium venues, are where contemporary music, particularly original live Australian contemporary music, begins. It's where emerging artists get to cut their teeth, and it's a critical part of the infrastructure, and it's struggling. So this program is very much about supporting this and acknowledging the important work that goes on in this part of the Australian live music industry. And that's what this program's aimed at, those small to medium venues that allow our young Aussie artists, or young as in, you know, emerging mid-tier artists, to both cut their teeth and also to earn an income. So it's not looking at that large stadium end of the spectrum at all, those larger venues. And so that's how the objectives here are written, about supporting that part of the sector. Next slide. Here. So for us then at the government end, it's about being able to, we need to be able to report on the success of the program. So that's why we have outcomes that fall out of the objectives. So it's useful for when you're writing an application to understand that we need to be able to show that this program is successful. And one way that we can do that is that we show that we've increased the number of live music performance opportunities for original music, but that also that we've created, you know, that this program has been able to strengthen and grow this part of the industry. So it's showing that live music venues we've been able to get more venues, or we've been able to strengthen the capacity of venues to put on live music. And acknowledging very much that we're in a COVID environment at the moment, and so some venues have not been able to put on a gig for a show for 5 months. So we completely acknowledge that. So it's about being able to support venues so that they're ready to reopen once restrictions are lifted. Next slide. Oh, that's a bit hard to read, isn't it? So this is pretty standard for Australian government funding, where if you want to apply for funding, you need to have an ABN, you need to be registered for GST. It's those sorts of things. You need to be a permanent resident. One thing that I will mention, so you can read that when you go into the guidelines, but one thing that I will mention is sole traders are eligible under this program, but individuals are not eligible. So it's really looking at businesses. So if you're a sole trader that can demonstrate that you are supporting and employing people, so you're a tiny venue that is a sole trader, you are eligible. So please put in an application if you feel that you can meet the objectives of the program. And eligibility is on page 7 of the guidelines. Yeah, next slide. So here, what's really important to clarify though in terms of eligibility is, again, coming back to, it's those small to medium venues that host original live music that are who this program is focused on. So if you're an organisation that supports live Australian music, you are still eligible to apply for the program, but you need to demonstrate how it is that you're working with those small to medium music venues. You'll see that we have not actually specified what a venue is. So we haven't necessarily gone with it's got to be a pub or a club, or it's got to be registered with, you know, this organisation, or, you know, be a member of that organisation. It's very much about the sector coming to us, describing to us what their proposal is and how it's going to deliver on the objectives. We definitely welcome proposals that come from a group, like it might be a group of venues that get together. It might be, 20 venues that, run across a regional area between, Melbourne and Brisbane, but they're out in the regions that are actually filling a gap in that regional touring circuit. We invite the sector to come together and to build networks and to build stronger touring circuits, or to build partnerships where you're working together so that music workers within your venue feel that they have more capacity to be able to put on live music. It's about creating better events as well. It's about creating an environment that artists want to play in, that audiences want to go to, and that the venue itself is actually that it enhances their venue, that it brings in new customers, brings in new audiences. So it's really building the sector. Next slide. So activity will be supported for a maximum period of 12 months. However, we do understand that given that COVID, we're in a really kind of unstable environment at the moment regarding COVID, that if you were successful for a grant and you found that you needed to vary the grant, you can just come to us and let us know, look, our venue's been closed again, or our state has been impacted in this way, we need to change our activity. Yeah, we completely understand that we're in a fairly kind of flexible and fluid environment at the moment. So you'll see there's a range of activities that will be supported. So it is around purchasing essential equipment, or small building alteration work. It's not for major capital expenditure. That's not what this fund is about. So it might be that you want to upgrade your PA. It may be that you've had a sound engineering report and you want to install, I don't know, double glazed windows, or something that's going to, some disability access, for example. So it's about this program being able to support you to be able to do that, to build your audiences and to be able to widen the audiences that you have. But it's also for programming and promotion. It can be for artist fees. As we know, in contemporary music, marketing is everything. So if shows haven't been marketed, there's going to be no audience, and what's the point? Everyone might as well go home. So it's recognising that. And it's upskilling venue staff. So it may be that you want to upskill venue staff so that they can market events better, to draw audiences in. It's really, you come to us and tell us what it is that your particular venue needs at this time. Next slide. What I did forget to mention on the last slide is that some of the activities that will probably not be supported are generally not one-off events, and also festivals, depending on the festival. Generally festivals, that's not what this program is focused on. However, if you're working together with some small to medium venues and you're looking at a collaboration or a partnership, then potentially you would be eligible. Also, tours by individual bands are not eligible. They can go to the Contemporary Music Touring Program, and covers and tribute bands are not covered by this funding. So moving to assessment now.
Oh, sorry, Annie, I think we skipped this slide. Sorry, we accident.
Yeah, look, co-contributions are very much about, and again, it will be scalable. It will be depending on the activity. So it depends on, the size of the venue. It depends on what activity it is that's being proposed. But we would expect that there is some contribution from you as a venue, or you've received some state or local government funding to also support your proposal. So whatever co-support there is really important. I mean, you as a venue will be providing all sorts of, in-kind support, as well as in a venue just to operate. It might be the ticketing. It may be, we completely understand at the moment that ticketing is a huge issue. If you're opening your venue and you're only able to, you know, you've got to stick to the 4 square metre rule. Maybe you can only fill 25% of the room, but in order for you to be able to make, you know, to cover your costs, you would need to cover 80%, or you would need to sell what would be 80% of a full room. We come to us and explain that, like, the more information that you can give us about what it is that you're able to contribute at this time, understanding the impact of COVID on your, you know, your business's ability to be able to derive income. So, and look, Andrew and Selene will go into a lot more information about what's important to be able to provide, so that the assessors can really understand what it is that you're proposing, which moves to the next slide, I think, where we talk about assessment. So really it's important that you address the objectives, because that's what your proposal will be assessed against. So the assessment process generally takes about 12 weeks from when we close applications on the 13th of September to when we let people know. We'll try and do it faster than that. We'll be pulling out all stops because we know this money needs to get out the door. So what will happen first is all of the applications will be assessed internally. They will be ranked, and then a long list will be formed from that. From that long list, we also have an EOI going currently for industry representatives, and applications will be sent out in batches to industry representatives for them to just have a look at and say, yes, we think this proposal is suitable, or no, we don't think this proposal is suitable, and for these reasons. So it's really just a simple oversight from industry representatives on how this proposal kind of fits into the overall ecology of the live music, Australian live music scene. And so it's really important that you can demonstrate your expertise and capacity to undertake the activity, so that whoever the assessors are can feel confident that you're going to be able to do what you say that you're going to do, and also demonstrate your need for the grant. So, you know, there may be a few venues out there that are just doing completely fine and they're not, you know, under any pressure from COVID, then their ability to be able to demonstrate the need for the grant is going to be less than those who are obviously under a lot more pressure at the moment. You also need to demonstrate value for money. So if you're going to put on one show per month and you're asking for $100,000, there's not a lot of value in that from our perspective in terms of meeting the objectives of the program. You know, if it's one show a week, maybe that's a little bit of value for money. If it's 7 shows a week, if it's 40 shows a week, if you put on, you know, 80 shows a week, like, it's, you know, that's probably quite a lot, but it's about being able to demonstrate that value for money in terms of, you know, if we provide $5,000, what's it actually going to deliver? So the final decisions then, coming back to the assessment process, the final decisions then are collated with input from the industry assessors, and we look at a moderation phase too. So we look at ensuring that we've got activity across the country, as well as a range of activities that are supported. And then those recommendations are provided to the Minister for the Arts and for the final decision-making process. And then the successful recipients will need to enter into a grant agreement with the Commonwealth and follow supporting requirements that are necessary under that. I think that's it. Next slide, Kim. Oh yes, look, we're just going to jump to Support Act here, because Support Act did receive $10 million from the Australian government. And this is about providing support, crisis relief support for the music industry and for music workers. So there is financial support available for you. We really encourage people to make the most of that. It is there for you to take advantage of. So please feel free to access that. There's also a wellbeing helpline. They've just taken on a First Nations support line. They're working together with the Association of Artist Managers to run some mental health training. We really encourage you to take advantage of the sort of suite of support that's available through Support Act. It is there for you, so don't feel like you shouldn't access that support or that somebody else is more deserving of you. We want to see people accessing this from the industry. Next slide, Kim. And there's our contact details. So if you've got any questions, particularly if there's a question that you don't get answered today, that's our email address, music@arts.gov.au. There's 3 of us in the team, myself, Stephanie and Catherine. So please make contact with us. We'll get back to you as quickly as we can. And there's the link to applications, which must be submitted via Smarty Grants. I think that's it from us, unless you can think of anything else, Kim, that I've missed.
No, I think that's great. I'm sure we'll get some questions later on.
Thanks, Anni. We've got a couple of questions which we might just address quickly while they're fresh. Just firstly, on the co-funding model, it might just be a good opportunity to outline to the Victorian venues about eligibility in terms of the Victorian music grants that they've applied for recently. Is that okay to address that now, please?
Yes, absolutely. So we encourage venues to have funding from other state government bodies or state territory government bodies or even local government. So we would really encourage you to include any co-contributions or any funding that you've applied for from your state body. It will strengthen your application if you have got funding from elsewhere, but it won't disadvantage you if you don't. So we understand that it's very different. You know, the environment across each state is completely different. Some, like Victoria, have a very strong funding model of support in place. Some other states territories don't have such strong funding in place. We will acknowledge that when we're looking at applications, but if you do have funding from your state body, that co-contribution is going to support your application. Is that?
And I'll just jump in there and say it's good for us if you make it quite clear what the state funding is supporting versus what the Australian government supports. So while we value that co-contribution, we can't fund the exact same activity or expense.
Thanks, Kim and Anni. So just to emphasise there, artists can't apply for these grants, but they can apply for the Contemporary Music Touring Program. Festivals are encouraged to apply through the RISE program, and it's for venues and organisations that support original live music. Just a couple of questions here on that, Anni, so we don't clog up the questions. Does original Australian music include world music, e.g. African bands that are based in Australia, African immigrants putting on African music? I think we can say that's a definite yes and is encouraged. Is that all right, Anni?
Yep, absolutely. What it doesn't support is covers bands and tribute bands.
Great. So another question from Scott was, sole trader not registered for GST.
So I'll jump in and say that if it's applicable, you have to be registered for GST. If you can demonstrate that it's not necessary and put in the declarations about that you're not required to be registered for GST, that would be fine.
Great. And from Daniel Ballantyne from ACT, Music ACT, is not for profit correct? I believe he's referring to the organisations that can apply for these grants.
Yep, not-for-profits can apply. It's just definitely ensuring that you're demonstrating how you're working together with small to medium venues.
Thank you. From Peter Caldwell, are the grants approved or declined, or are there partial grants, i.e. if I apply for 10K and I'm not successful for the full amount, but can I be granted a lesser amount such as 5K?
Yes, that will be possible. I mean, we're reticent to do that when people have applied for a particular amount of money. It would be if there were a small part of the budget that we would come back to you and let you know that there's, part of the budget that you've applied for is ineligible, but this amount is available for you.
Patty, you're on mute.
Hello?
Sorry, Patrick, we completely lost you then.
Oh, sorry, I'm not sure why. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So the first question, Annie, is can ticketing be the core contribution?
Potentially, ticketing can be part of the contribution, yes. I mean, generally venues, they also do, venues do a whole bunch of things in the background that, a show can happen. So provide that information, let us know what it is that you do in order to put on a show. And I think that Andrew and Selene might go into a little more detail around that.
Yeah, so don't underestimate your pro bono contribution to stage music.
Yep, absolutely.
And also one other question from EL, will we also need contributions from confirmed sources?
You can put in, if you have applied for a grant from somewhere, then you can just let us know that you've applied, but it's not successful yet. So no, it doesn't need to be confirmed yet. But also, as we're moving forward, I mean, ticketing is a really tricky thing. We don't know you can only report on the environment as it currently is. So if you're working within a 4 square metre rule, for example, you can only report on what your expected ticketing is going to be under those current restrictions, for example. So report on what you can, report on your estimates or on, potential grants that you have applied for. But no, we don't expect you've already received the grant.
Great, thanks, Annie. We'll just ask one more relative to a question I just asked before we get to the rest of the questions at the end. It's from Victorian Venues saying that they don't know the results of the Victorian funding in time for this application to go in. So they still need to acknowledge what costs they've applied to be covered from the Victorian grants and not apply for those costs as well. Is that the appropriate answer there?
I think, yeah, you cannot, I mean, you can't, when you don't, oh, sorry, do you want to jump in, Kim?
No, I was going to say, I think that probably is the appropriate answer. I know we're going to have some confusion going forward, but I think it is because we can't fund the same elements, as I've said before. So it's probably makes your project stronger if you tell us what you've applied for Victoria and what our money could go together. If things change before your funding agreement comes, we'll have to adapt that later, I think. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. So assume that you are going to successfully get the grant in Victoria in this application. Acknowledge it, and then if you do get it or don't get it, then you can update your team as to the result of that grant.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way to go.
Okay. We will hand it over to Selene and we'll try and come back to all of your further questions at the end of the presentations. Thank you, Annie and Kim. Selene is going to give a presentation on budgeting and support material. Over to you, Selene.
Thank you. Thanks, Pat. So just a little bit about me and why I'm here giving this presentation. I work for an organisation called Auspicious Arts Projects, and we work with independent artists putting together budgets and helping them with funding applications. So I've been doing this for 10 years and have, my daily life is around budget. So hopefully I can help you through the process of this application. So I'm going to be focusing on budgets and support materials, and then I'm going to hand over to Andrew, who's going to go through the sort of the guidelines and the application and how to approach that. So I guess whenever I'm approaching a budget, what I consider is that the budget is a planning tool and it's a roadmap of how to deliver your project. And it really shows if your project's viable. So it's a really important part of the process. And when I'm putting together a funding application, I always do the budget at the start rather than at the end of the process, because then that helps. I know what my idea is, what I want to apply for. And by doing the budget at the start, I can see whether it's actually viable for the amount of money that I'm asking for. Now, I've pulled up a few of the guidelines that relate to the budgeting part of the application. I won't talk them through because they are in the guidelines, and one thing that I would say is just make sure you read those guidelines over and over again, because they do hold all those crucial information. And also, it's really important to understand what is eligible expenditure, which is listed in here, and also there's a list of what you can't spend the money on. So don't put your budget together and then read the guidelines later and realise that you've put a whole lot of costs in there that aren't eligible for the grant. And again, read through those in your own time. The other section here is I just wanted to pull up the criteria number 3. The demonstrated need for the grant. This relates all to the budget. And you can see here, one of the things is that you need to provide a balanced budget. And the last time we ran one of these workshops, this question came up a lot of, you know, well, what does that mean? And the balanced budget is a budget that balances to 0. And that doesn't mean that it's not your ongoing budget for the running of your whole organisation. It's your proposal that you're putting forward, because if you show a budget that is has a surplus, then it looks like you don't need all that money. And if you put in a budget that has a deficit, then it looks like that your project's not viable. And I've made an example budget that we'll go through, and hopefully that'll show why that it needs to balance to 0. Okay, so when you're putting a budget together, as I said, first thing to do is you need to read the guidelines. That will give you all the information that you need. And if it doesn't give you all the information and you have questions, ring up Live Music Australia and ask them and get some clarification. It's really important that you do that. If you don't understand, don't make a guess, because it might make your project and your application ineligible. Because the budget shows whether your proposal is viable, it's important to do things like get quotes. So do that early on. Sometimes it takes a while for a quote to be put together, but you need it for your budget. So get onto that very early. As I said before, I always recommend doing the budget first, because then that will tell you early on whether what your proposal is can happen for the amount of money in the grant. If you write the application first, and then you do your budget after, you might find that your big grand idea is far bigger. It's more than $100,000, and then you sort of might run out of time to go back and adjust it. I also recommend that you draft the budget separately. So many people will go into the application and they'll just start plugging the figures into the portal. That can get you into a bit of trouble because you can't see where things have gone wrong. Excel is your best friend as far as I'm concerned. Do your budget, get it so it balances beautifully and that you're happy with it, and then use that information to put over into the portal. And then you can also use that your more detailed budget as part of your support materials and upload it. I would recommend doing that personally. Include budget notes when you're putting a budget together. Again, you want the person assessing your application to be able to understand how you got to a figure. And again, I'll go through that in more detail when I pull up the example budget. Balance to 0, we've talked through that. Now, this is an important thing to remember, and I did notice when you read through the application, this is stated a couple of times, but it's really important that if you're registered for GST, you need to put your budget together excluding GST. So if you get a quote for $5,500 for a publicist, you put the amount in as $5,000. And that's because if you're applying for $100,000 and you're successful, the grant will be paid with the GST on top. Once you've done all of that, put your budget together. As I said, you want to go back and make sure that your budget supports your application. Think about it as telling a story. Do the numbers in your application tell the same story in your narrative of what you're doing? Because they need to match. And then again, once you've written your application, you might change your mind about a few things as you're going through with your proposal. So you need to go back and check your budget again at the end of the process. Okay. Generally, budgets are made out of from income and expenses, and income can come from grants, event income, donations, in kind. And generally expenses are broken up into wages and fees, production costs, marketing costs, admin, access and in kind. So your budget might not have all of those things, but in general, they're the categories they're broken up in. I really wanted to talk about in kind because not everyone necessarily knows what in kind means. In my world's more the performing arts world, so an in-kind might be someone offers you a rehearsal venue for free, or someone might offer you mentoring, come in and mentor you through a process and not charge you. So it can be someone's time, it can be your own time, it can be physical space, it can be equipment. So have a think about what is being contributed to the period that you're asking for funding where no cash is being exchanged. And also what's really important to remember with in-kind donations, in-kind income, is that it has to balance out on the expense side. So anything, if you are saying, well, I'm going to contribute my PA as part of my proposal, and that's worth $15,000, you put in-kind PA $15,000, but it has to balance on the other side, so you put it as an expense. Otherwise, your budget won't balance. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into the example budget that I've put together. I do want to note that I haven't put any in-kind in this, but I really recommend that you do, because it's a really good way to show confirmed co-contributions. I was trying to keep this budget a bit contained so that it can be read on the screen. And those of you who attended the workshop for the Live Music Victoria grant, I've just modified that budget a little bit to show what it might look like for this new grant. So one of the things that I've done here is in the income. I've shown that I've gone for a $63,000 grant with Creative Victoria, and I've written unconfirmed. And I know I saw lots and lots of questions come up in the chat about what do we do if our income isn't confirmed? And all I can say is that just remember, everyone's in the same boat. Every single person who applied for that grant who's applying for this one isn't confirmed yet. So you're not at any disadvantage. And it's not going to disadvantage your application. So what's really important is if you did apply for that grant, that you don't have any crossover expenditure. So if you go down, so I'm just going to get a little laser pointer here. So if you see here, I've made myself a column of what I applied for Creative Victoria, and I've made it a column here of what I'm going to apply for with this new grant. So you can see that there's no crossover. So I'm not asking for any costs in the same column. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of splitting up those costs between the grants is I've focused my Creative Vic application on costs of running the venue and business planning and artist fees. And for my Live Music Victoria, I've focused on publicity and programming. So you can see I brought in a new booking manager that I didn't have before, and I'm spending lots of money on marketing, and I also want to make my venue accessible. Now, if I don't get the Creative Vic grant and it doesn't cover all the costs that I've proposed there, then I can at least put in an application with Live Music Australia in the next round or next year, because there's going to be several rounds to cover those costs. So it is important that you don't double up on those costs. And there's a good chance you'll get Creative Vic, and if you don't, then you can apply for those things in the future. The other thing I wanted to point out here, so just having really short notes can give a lot of information. So you can see in my income, I've written whether it's confirmed or an estimate or unconfirmed. And then over here on the notes side, I've put some information that will hopefully hopefully show someone my thinking of how I've calculated something. So I've done a tickets estimate, and like Annie was saying before, there's no point saying that you're going to sell out full venues for next year when it's quite likely there's going to be reduced capacity. So for my ticket estimates, I've based it over an 8-week period, 3 nights a week, and I'm proposing that I'll sell 30 tickets at $20, but I'm 120 capacity venue. So you can show that I'm only going to sell 25% of my ticketing space, which obviously fits in with my COVID safe plan. So this is my total budget for that proposed period, which you can see balances to 0. This is the Creative Vic grant. I haven't broken down all the other income streams, which you could do, and sometimes that's really useful to have several columns. But in this one, because it's really important to show that the Live Music Victoria application's not doubling up with Creative Vic. Sorry if this is very Victorian-centric right now, but this shows really clearly this. If you didn't apply for that, then you would take that out and you'd think about other things like there might be JobKeeper, sales of drinks, ticket sales, merch sales, other things, in-kind contributions. So have a think about those things. Now, the way that it's set up in the application is that you can actually, there's space for you to fill in these boxes. So you can see when you get to, this is taken from the application attachment that was provided. You put in here, so I've said that I want to apply for 45,280. So I put that amount in here. And then all my other income sources I put in here to match the budget. And then in this next section, what they want to know is what the expenditure items are and the amount exclusive of GST. So I would be copying everything in there except for my column from the Live Music Australia grant. Oh, sorry, I take that back. This is the things that I'm only paying for with Live Music Australia. And then the next column along here is, this is the thing that's being paid for out of all my other income sources. Okay, so hopefully that clarified up some of the sort of approach of putting a budget together. And if people have questions, I will take them at the end. And the next section I wanted to talk about before I hand over to Andrew is the support materials section. Now this is taken from the guidelines. Basically, there's not a huge amount of support materials required for this grant compared to other grants that are out there. There's the project budget, which you do fill into the application as you go. But as I said, you could provide as another document that had more notes in there. There's a work plan, which may or may not be relevant to your proposal. Evidence of funding needed, so quotes and things like that. And then here, evidence of support from community or industry, if relevant. Now, some of those things are attached in the application as you go along, some at the end. Personally, this evidence of support from community or industry, if relevant, I would think that it's a really good idea to get those kind of support materials together. Even if you're just applying for solely for equipment and upgrade and you're not applying for any programming, it still wouldn't hurt to get some love letters from, you know, people out in the industry of the importance of your venue. There is a work plan section as part of one of the questions where, again, you fill this into the portal as you go. This, I imagine, is quite high level, and if you've got something more detailed, like you might have a detailed marketing plan or a proposal if you're getting some really technical work done, I would consider having something as an attachment as well as filling out this section. And then finally at the end, oh no, so this is on your programming. So this isn't relevant if you're applying just for equipment, but if you are applying for money to program and strengthen your programming ability over next year, they give you an opportunity to put in proof of past programming, and then future programming. Now, I would have a really good think here about, is a web link to your past programming really telling enough of a story? So if you're going to your website, is that really giving the full glory of everything that you've done in the past? If it's not, spend some time together putting together a document of selling your venue and what you've done. So that might mean that you need to spend a bit of time with a graphic designer or not. Maybe your website just tells that story beautifully, but this is a really good opportunity to show everything that you've done. And sometimes selling it as a whole rather than one-off events might take a bit of time to really get that looking good. And likewise with your future programming. I think, and then at the end here, you've got an opportunity to add some more links. So they might be, again, if you are getting support letters together, where you add those. And with the support materials, one thing that I would really recommend is think about being the person who's assessing all these applications. So if you've got 10 support letters, rather than having 10 links and that the person assessing your application having to go in and open every one of them, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're assessing 50 applications, that's just a lot of time that you don't want to be wasting. So consider saving them all as one PDF. Same with all your quotes, get them together, save them together as a single document. And when you're putting together your support materials, the budget, as I said, I like to do early on, and same with the support materials, especially if you're asking people to write you letters, it's better to ask them, give them lots of lead time to do that. So tips on asking people for support letters. I don't know if you've ever been in the position of asking someone to write you a reference and they've said, sure, you write it and send it to me and I'll sign it and put it on letterhead. Now that's obviously not exactly what you want to happen. So when you're asking people for support letters, ask them with plenty of lead time so that they've got time to write it. Be strategic. Think about who you're asking and why. So don't only ask just bands to do it, or don't only ask patrons to do it. Try and get a good range of support letters across a variety of people, and be really clear why you're asking them to do it. So if you're asking, for example, to upgrade your venue to make it more accessible, think about some of your clients who that's really going to benefit, and you could say, you know, can you please write a support letter of what a difference it would make if we had a ramp put in our venue, and what would that would mean to you. Make it easy for them to do. You could provide them with some dot points, and then set a false early deadline. So if this grant is due on the 13th of September, say that you need it back by the 7th of September to buy yourself lots of time to get it done. And then this is just a step-by-step rundown of how I like to approach putting a grant together. So first of all, I read the guidelines. Second, I make sure that I'm eligible, because I may not be eligible, and I notice there's lots of great questions around eligibility there. And if it's not clear about being eligible in the guidelines, bring up and ask. Then you sign up to Smarty Grants, which is the portal supporting the application. Get your support materials and marketing materials together. Prepare your budget, draft your application review, and submit. And so on that note, I'm going to hand over to Andrew.
Thanks, Selene. We've got a few questions here, but Andrew, we might tack them on to the end, the last 15 minutes. So we'll hand over to you.
Sure. So I don't have slides for this one. This one is more just a little bit off the cuff, based on having a really good look at the guidelines and just putting a toe in the water and getting a sense of what these grants really are about. I'll reference the Victorian ones, but I also recognise that we're not all in Victoria, far from it. Here's a couple of observations. The first observation is that we are talking about $2.5 million in this round. If you divide that by 100,000, that means there's only going to be 25 grants given out. I don't think the intention is to give out only 25 grants. So I don't think there's going to be 25 by 100,000 given out. If you are going to ask for 100,000, you're going to have to really stand out and really show that you fulfill the criteria in a very special kind of way. So I would think about the actual proposal that you're putting forward, rather than just going for 100,000 because, hey, there's 100,000 available. Very few people are going to probably get 100,000 in my view anyway. Second thing to consider is, it has been slightly mentioned, but not completely, maximum of 25,000 available for equipment. So, everyone could put in new lights and everyone could put in a new PA and everyone would be happier, particularly the PA companies. But actually consider whether, that's going to be your priority for this one. For the people that are in Victoria, and it sort of applies across the board, but specifically for Victoria, the Victorian grants were, in my perception, survival grants. They were there with this intention of helping venues literally pay some bills so that they're still there on the other side. Rightly or wrongly, in fact, it's not even right or wrong, it's just the way this is, that these are not so much survival grants. And you've got to understand their history. This whole program was generated pre-COVID. And whilst I think they've done a fabulous job in bringing a post-March perspective to this, and they are definitely now grants that are going to be in the context of a COVID world. I don't think they're intended and were never intended to be survival grants. Now, I know, and I've seen a couple of comments on the chat, that every single venue here could easily find a way to spend $100,000 to help ensure their survival. This is not what this money's for. So what I'd be suggesting is that when you are making an application here, come up with something that's clever, something that hits the guidelines, read between the lines of the guidelines. There is a suggestion of supporting partnerships and collaborations and networks. And, this is the federal government, and the federal government does like jobs. They like to see musicians being employed. They like to see support people around the scene being employed, whether that's, production people or, your own venue bar staff, all the ancillary services that you need to run a venue. So I think you need to look at it as, how are we going to present something that's going to stimulate activity in our venue, and how is that activity going to then have a snowball effect that it helps our venue be part of the solution going forward, that yes, we will be here, yes, we will be engaged with the presentation of live music, and if we can find a way to make a profit doing that, or to re-engage our audience so that they at least come back and drink our beer and eat our food, that will stimulate that venue to continue going forward. So I'd say what you need to do with this one is not so much focus on survival, but focus on growth, focus on activity, focus on generating action in and around your venue. Now, that's going to be different for every single venue. So I don't think there is one sort of silver bullet line that you can put in here that's going to guarantee you of success. I think what you need to do with this one is be clever. Don't be outrageously creative that you're doing something that just doesn't make sense, but wow, it sounds fun. No, be businesslike about it, but try to find what your venue could do. Not in a perfect world, because we are not in a perfect world, certainly. But what your venue could do in the circumstances that could regenerate activity and help you get that turnover ticking so that you can reinvest in more live music in a sustainable way going forward. That was just my takeaway. Annie and Kim, is that sort of make sense?
turning myself off mute. Yes, actually, Andrew, everything you said makes a lot of sense, and I would support that. So it sounded good.
Yeah, that was a summary, I think. And it is, I mean, we recognise that we're in this extraordinary situation at the moment, and that for a lot of venues, they have been closed for 5 months. So it is recognising that, but it's about how to put some plans in place so that you can move forward, so that when you're ready to reopen, these are the things that are going to be able to enable you to do that.
Yeah, I picked up some words going through the various frequently asked questions, etc. That I think, you know, don't overlook these words. They've been published for a reason. New modes of practice and new approaches. Develop venues of networks of venues rather. Bring dynamism to live music. Increase employment. Build cultural capital. Those words are there for a reason, and I think you need to, when you are thinking about what you're going to apply for in this, actually address that and think about how you can bring out those capabilities. More shows, larger and diverse audiences, increase professionalism, enhance audience experience. Address those points because they're there for a reason. And when the assessors are going to be given your application, they'll be given a brief to look for, you know, what is an eligible activity and what the 3 criteria are. Criteria number 1 is super important. Contribute to aims and objectives of the program. So re-establish venue capacity, improve regional touring. I mean, it's not an accident that the department here has the word regional in its title. Building staff capacity, and there is in the form, the application form, there's a specific thing about, you know, what professional development activities are going to take place as part of your application. That doesn't mean you have to dream up some pretend workshop and, you know, say, yeah, we're going to do workshops on whatever. But think about, well, how is this application going to help upskill your staff, give your staff some, or yourselves, some skills and abilities that might be able to contribute to your venue operation going forward. Create venues as safe spaces. Let's, you know, never overlook that. That's an important consideration. So as tempting as it is to, you know, just sort of try to find some money to pay some bills, and, you know, don't worry, I understand. You all desperately need some money to pay some bills. With this particular one, I think you have to think a little bit more long-term and go, all right, how can this program, which is in fact a 4-year program, how can this program contribute to the rebirth or the regeneration of your venue going forward? And I think there is no sort of one size fits all answer to that. One question for Kim and Anni while I'm here. A couple of people have already mentioned to me there's a section on the form that says, what is your annual turnover? Are you looking for pre-COVID or current annual turnover in answering to that question?
That's a difficult one. I mean, we started designing it obviously thinking it was normal business turnover. So I guess that means pre-COVID. I think in some ways we're open to how somebody really wants to answer it. It's really to give us a sense of the size of your business. I know we have a few questions later about the staffing and stuff as well, or the people working on a project. So it's really, I guess, partly for us to help target this program to the small to medium venue sector. Yeah, I think, Annie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's it. That's the answer. And so you won't be penalised if you don't have a huge turnover at the moment.
So it's more almost a measuring device to see who's applying, and it's not central to the success of your application.
Absolutely. Part of the assessment criteria at all. It's like if you go down to the assessment criteria, you see that that's not part of it at all.
Now, most of the people here today are not going to have any difficulty with criteria number 2. You know, prior experience in managing money, business and government structures, experience of personnel. You know, if you're engaged enough with running your venue to be here today, you will probably be able to demonstrate criteria to, you know, fairly easily that you're a good venue operator. So that's not too hard. And criteria 3, the need for the grant. Well, you know, clearly everybody needs the grant, but what you need to show is that the grant is going to, you know, dare I say it, have a stimulus effect on your venue. This whole program was originally intended to be a stimulus program, and it kind of still is. I don't think it's a survival program, it's a stimulus program. Now, you know, should there be a survival program as well? Yeah, probably somewhere. And that's what the Victorian one was about. And I know Brisbane had, Queensland rather, had some grants go through to some venues the other day, which I got the impression they were kind of more survival oriented as well. But, you know, just because it is what it is, I think, you know, we all have to go forward on the basis of it is what it is, and to make the most of it and tailor your application in that way. Value for money, I think, needs to be shown by how this is going to stabilise and re-establish your venue as a viable music business, and how that sort of go-forward position, that's what I think this government will be looking for in terms of value for money. Yeah, you know, if they're just going to underwrite a couple of shows, well, is that really an investment? Probably not. If they're going to underwrite a way of you trading under restrictions, or if they're going to underwrite a way of you re-engaging with your community, re-engaging with your punters, re-engaging with the musicians that fill your particular niche within the live music landscape, I suspect, and it's only a suspicion, I suspect that that would be looked at favourably.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We've got a lot of questions, so for the last 20 minutes, we might read those out and we can take turns answering them. So just on your presentation, Andrew, something you recently said, EL from the Boite asks, when you say stimulus, is the focus on the applicant or on the sector?
I think it's both. I think it's primarily now it will be viewed as being on the applicant because of the situation that we're in. I think there will be a leaning towards, all right, how's this going to help this venue? But I think in the bigger picture, if you can show that you're going to use this money to, you know, build creative partnerships, build relationships, establish a network, make your venue a part of a, not a formal network, but where your place in the overall ecosystem is going to be. I think if you can show that, it will probably be viewed favourably. So I think it's a stimulus for both.
Would you agree?
Again, it's just my interpretation. You know, I don't know.
No, I think I would agree with that. I think, you know, ultimately it's stimulus for the sector, but I think exactly what, I'd reiterate what Andrew said at the moment, I think we're looking at both.
Great. And one other from EL, if the application involves a consortium of venues, would support letters from them be considered adequate evidence of industry support? I'd probably say yes, having them confirm that they're part of the application, but then some other support letters from some artists and other beneficiaries of from the ecosystem, a range of support letters then. Would you say, Selene?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine in that instance also a really detailed work plan would be a good a good place to start, especially if you haven't worked together, and, you know, showing how all the partners will work together.
Yeah, I think again, without making too much of a comparison to the Victorian one, because Victoria is only one state, in the Victorian one, there was a need to show how beloved your venue was, how important it was to a community, to a specific niche or genre of music. I think that's still good, and it never does any harm to show that you are a beloved venue. But I think try to tailor your support letters to what you're proposing, as well as my venue is awesome.
Andrew?
Yeah, and I would agree with that. So I think the difference between showing the partnership is sort of more of an agreement on how you're going to work together, and like Selene was saying, your work program, how the other elements, and showing absolutely that there's an agreement in place versus some sort of support. But it's not, as Andrew was saying, we're not necessarily after sort of wide community support, more that you're I guess a viable part of that sector more than a beloved venue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so the evidence is really to support, yes, how it's going to support the venue, but probably more importantly, how it's going to support the music sector.
Yeah.
The ecosystem around it. Yep. Selene, one on budgets. As a venue bar restaurant, would we include food, beverages, income as part of our budget? Most of our pre-sale ticketed shows include a meal.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea, because it shows, the holistic way that your venue works. But I guess I would worry if meals made up more of, the financial makeup rather than the music side of it. So you'd need to be careful to show that the music side of it was important, but as a co-contribution, yes. Great.
One from Andrew here. The grant mentions that equipment upgrades will only be eligible for up to $20,000. So can we include that amount plus extra for other works in the same project, i.e. apply for $50,000, including $20K for a sound system and $30K for soundproofing works?
We would be looking at $25,000 per venue. So each venue applying for up to $25,000 for equipment and upgrades. But again, it's that scale of what it says generally in the guidelines. Like it clearly says generally up to $25,000. So it's about, again, the scale of the activity, the scale of the venue. If you're a tiny venue that puts on one show a week, then applying for $50,000 is probably not going to be successful. But if you're a venue who's a critical part of the infrastructure, who is a hard-working live music venue that can show that not only are you, have you been in the game, had skin in the game in the live music sector for a long time, and you put on, however many 200 shows a week, plus you're actually wanting to, be able to try and pull a new audience, because under COVID things have really changed. You want to actually try and work on pulling a new audience. You've been thinking about doing this for a while, but you haven't really had the opportunity. Here's an opportunity to be able to do that, to be able to look at how you can draw in a new audience. So again, scalable activity. If you can demonstrate value for money in that, this investment is going to mean really strong support for the sector, then potentially you can ask for more money than $25,000 for.
And I'll just go in there and remind people that they can apply more than once. I think, as Andrew mentioned, we're not aiming to have every successful applicant, get 100,000 or 50,000, but we're very happy for multiple applications from the same venue over the different rounds. There's going to be 8 rounds. So if you've got something that you want to put in now, that's not going to prevent you to putting in another element for support in a future round.
And also, I'm not sure where the question is now, but someone mentioned that at the moment, while it's fantastic to get a new sound system, maybe getting a new sound system is not going to be the thing that helps you expand your capacity in the next 12 months. So, what is going to be the most beneficial use of money during that time. It might be expanding your programming, or it might be making your venue accessible to audience who are unable to come there. You know, there's a whole bunch of other things, and maybe, yeah, asking for money for a new sound system might be a good 2022 application, but right now it could be based on what's going to get you through the next 12 months, and yeah. Thanks,
Selene. Jeremy Janke. Hi, Jeremy. One of the questions asks, how many staff does your organisation employ, expressed as full-time equivalent? Are casual employees included on this? And if so, how are they calculated, or is it just full-time and part-time?
Okay, I can answer that if you like. With casual employees, think about how many on average hours they work. So if you have a casual who's in there 10 hours a week, then if you've got 4 casuals at 10 hours a week, that's the equivalent of 1 full-time person. So add up all their hours to work out the equivalent. It doesn't have to be bang on exact. It's to just get an idea. It's a very governmental way of measuring things.
Yeah, agreed. And as I said before, it's a bit like the turnover. It's for us to have a sense of this, you know, the nature and the scale of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Oh, you go, Andrew.
Sorry, I just saw it, or not just saw, I saw it earlier, a question from Brendan, which was quite a detailed question. And I totally see where you're coming from. A lot of the venues are absolutely rooms for hire. They're not promoters. They don't necessarily pay the artists. But you are able to tell that story. The people that are assessing these grants are going to be people that are familiar with the operation of live music. And it is, you know, very well known that a lot of venues don't pay the artists. They run a room, and the promoters pay the artists, and the promoters run the show, and the venue provides the facility. So that's your business. So what you could apply for is some way of engaging with your customers. Now, you have 2 sets of customers, and I'm obviously, you know, telling you something that you're very well aware of. You have the punters that come in the door, and, you know, they're vitally important. But you also have a separate set of customers, and that's promoters. So how could you spend money from this fund to attract more promoters to bring more shows to your venue? Are you able to provide, you know, an upgrade to your ticketing system that will, you know, I'm just coming up with things off the top of my head here. You know, what can you do to stimulate more shows being brought into your venue? And if that some of that activity requires money, well, you can apply for that sort of project. You know, we want to reinvigorate our venue by attracting more promoters, which will obviously in turn, you know, attract more punters, which will in turn, you know, sell more beer, or whatever it is that you know, your revenue item actually is. So tell that story. You know, you don't have to necessarily pay artist fees if that's not your business model. But if your business model is attracting more promoters, you know, what can you do? What can, I won't say we, because I'm not giving out the grants, but say to the government, you know, what can you do to help us bolster our business model as a live music venue? And I'm sure you could think up 100,000 different ways of doing that.
I'm going to just in Andrew and just also mention that showing that artists are being paid is actually going to strengthen your application as well. You know, that artists are the backbone of the industry, and so ensuring that artists are paid is really critical.
Yeah.
So that is definitely something that will bolster an application. While we understand there's the business end, we want to make sure that artists are not being expected yet again to do something for nothing to be able to support us through this COVID crisis. Yeah. So if you're asking us for funding to pay artists, that's a good thing.
Yeah, but if you're working in partnership with reputable promoters who, you know, clearly do pay the artists, and bringing more reputable promoters into your venue, that ticks that box, right?
And exactly, and you can then demonstrate that, explain that in your application. And I've jumped in to say something else because I've seen a question come up about whether promoters are eligible, and they are. So we have left the eligibility quite open. So as long as you've done, as we've, like Selene's explained, go and actually see that you're eligible. Promoters could very well be eligible, and then almost work in the reverse of what you were saying, Andrew, and work with particular venues. So in that case, we want to see, what are you bringing to the small to medium venue sector? Who are you working with? Are you supporting, say, a regional tour? You know, you're working in the targeted area, for example. So sort of showing those links back into the venue.
But it can't be a tour of one artist.
No. It's more like building that capacity, going back to that same venue, helping to sort of, again, strengthen the sustainability of the ongoing shows at those venues potentially.
Thanks, Kim. We have a question from Lachlan Mackenzie McHarg. What about a relatively new venue with little history? What would be your advice on submissions here if you've only got a few gigs under your belt? Are they likely to be successful compared to, you know, the more experienced venues, or can they talk about their sort of focus on the plans for the future?
Certainly they can. They will need to demonstrate, though, you know, where they sit in the live music sector. So they will need to be able to demonstrate that they have, you know, some runs on the board, you know, that you can be a brand new venue, but you may have a lot of experience within the industry. And again, when we originally wrote the program guidelines, and again, this was based on these conversations with industry, there was a bit of a focus on startups and news. I think it's a little bit tricky in this new environment where under COVID, we actually probably have a lot of venues who will be applying to this fund who might not have previously. And so the competition for funds is going to be greater. It's going to be extremely competitive. We know that. And so, again, I think that Selene was talking about being able to demonstrate that your business is actually, the business model is strong enough. Is it worth us? If we give our money to you, is it going to be safe? You know, is it actually going to be spent in the way that you say it's going to be spent? Can we have confidence that you have a strong enough business model that you can deliver? So that's what those newer venues are going to be able to, you know, need to demonstrate.
Thanks, Annie. We have a Victorian venue saying that given we're unable to trade at the moment in Victoria, it's difficult to estimate what our income will be. And Liz goes on to say there's also that issue around whether they can reopen. Is there flexibility and understanding around this when entering their budget? Maybe Selene.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a really tricky one, and everyone's in that same boat of operating in a state of uncertainty. And I think that, you know, in ways of showing, maybe strengthening the viability of what you're proposing is, I mean, I think I could be wrong, but this grant can operate over 12 months. Is that right? You've got 12 months of the activity? Yeah. So I would consider maybe, you know, saying that you're applying for 6 months worth. And so if it doesn't happen in the first 6 months, it would happen in the other 6 months. Or if you're looking at your total number of gigs, that you're asking for 50% of that to be shored up. But certainly at the end of the day, if you can't go ahead with what you've proposed because lockdown restrictions are stopping you, they're going to be stopping everyone else. And what happens in those situations, it's just a matter of keeping an open dialogue with the funding body. So if in March you can see that's not going to happen, you contact them and then you organise what's called a variation. And a variation might be that your 6 month is moved, as long as it's within the 12 months, or you might reimagine how you spend that money. If you can't spend it on bands, then you go, well, can we spend the money on bands in a different way? So, you know, I imagine that there's going to be a lot of understanding, and what's the most important thing is keeping in contact with the funding body and not going off and doing something different without letting them know. But yeah.
No, don't do that. Please don't do that. Please come and talk to us.
Yeah. So they are they are flexible. Just keep in touch if circumstances change.
I think one of the other things you can do to help your situation there also is try to structure it so it can be time shifted. Your proposal. Don't, base it all around, the Spring Carnival at Flemington or something, which is unlikely because you're not a venue. You're a venue. You're not a racecourse. But you know what I'm saying. Don't tie it too specifically to one time frame. If it's able to be time shifted, heaven forbid a third wave or something, make it something that's time shifted.
Thanks, Andrew. I've only got 3 minutes left. I'll try and get through a few more of these questions. Do you recommend grouping all applications into one grant application or applying for separate items such as equipment, marketing, expenses and artist fees?
We would recommend putting it all into one application. You can actually only apply once per round, but you can apply in rounds. So, it's not this is the last chance that you'll ever get. So in terms of those things, we would recommend that you put it all together so it's a comprehensive application.
And that'll be the same with you, Justin. You can apply for production, upgrades, fees for artists and professional development in the same application. But have a plan and think about applying a few times over the 4 years and what you might ask for now and in a couple of years' time. And you might actually include your whole plan in this application as well, that you're asking for this at the moment, but over the 4 years, this is your COVID plan and this is the support you'll be seeking.
Just a question, sorry, Patty, just a question for the Office of the Arts folks. If you successfully deliver in round one, does that enhance your prospects in subsequent rounds?
Each round will be treated in its own right. It will be relative to the applications we receive. So it's not necessarily going to enhance. Of course, successfully delivering will be a requirement to get more money. We're not probably going to have simultaneous grants going, if that makes sense. But yeah, each round will be treated in its own individual case.
Cool.
Thank you, Kim. We are running out of time. If people have any further questions, the Office for the Arts grant team, your details are on the website. So it's best just for them to email or call your grant team, Kim and Annie?
Absolutely. So the email address and the phone number are both on the website, so arts.gov.au. And there's all that information like guidelines, frequently asked questions through Grants Connect as well. And yes, happy to receive emails.
It's a pretty simple email address, music@arts.gov.au.
Can you repeat that, please, Annie?
music@arts.gov.au.
music@arts.gov.au. There we go. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
If we didn't get a chance to answer any of your questions, please send an email to that address. We're glad to hear that this has been such a helpful session. We wish you all the best of luck. And if you are unsuccessful in this first round, don't give up. There are multiple rounds over 4 years. So we thank the Office for Arts for their support for live music. We empathise with all of you doing it so hard at the moment, and we all need you back strong and firing as soon as possible. So our thoughts are with you and all the hard work you're going through at the moment. Don't hesitate to contact the Office for Arts if you have any further questions, and also contact your state peak body if you need some assistance. Certainly Music Victoria has grant writers on our website, and other AMIN peak bodies. You can contact them for assistance as well. Please put your hands together for Annie, Kim, Andrew and Selene. Thanks very much for all of your time. Good luck, everyone. We can't wait to see you at your venues before too long. Bye.
Thank you.